Hello, I'm David Canfield with Entertainment Weekly. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are joined by the director and two stars of Netflix's new film, The Boys in the Band, director Joe Mantello, and stars Jim Parsons and Matt Bomer, two of a large, excellent cast. Thank you both, and Joe, so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. This, of course, revived on Broadway not too long ago with the same cast as in the film and won the Tony for Best Revival, which begs the question, Joe, why a movie? Why continue this story on the cinematic form?
You know, it was Ryan Murphy, our producer Ryan Murphy's original vision when he first proposed the idea of the project that we revive the play on Broadway, take a little time off, and then do a new version of the movie for Netflix. So that really this was all part of Ryan's master plan. And I'm a slightly nervous, skeptical person. So I just thought well, should we just do the play, see how that goes? But that's the way that Ryan thinks. He thinks big and he's bold. And so really, it came from him.
Jim, you are the sort of guide into this role along with Matt. You're the main characters who start before the rest of the cast joins this party gone fairly wrong. What was it like for you stepping into this role again in the same story, but told a slightly different way with new conventions and things like that?
Honestly, my only hesitation was I'm sort of in the Joe camp. My attitude is just very much, I'll believe it when I see it, So I never, until it was like a week before we were supposed to report to set, did I actually think we were going to do the movie. And it doesn't speak to a lack of faith in anybody or Ryan, but I just was like, so many things happen. And I was okay with that in a lot of ways if it didn't happen, because the Broadway experience had been so meaningful to me, and the experience for all of us as a group, I think, was so golden that I was scared a little bit about tarnishing that time and having something, I don't know. So I was a little nervous, but as soon as we got back and we were all in the same room at the same time again, and we started saying these words again, I felt not only at home, but I felt really excited. And especially looking back now that it's done, I see so clearly how we all began expanding upon deepening what we had worked on. It was a new form, but it was just like a further exploration of it. And the rarity of getting to do that is, I've never done anything quite like that before. And it was such a full experience because of it.
So Matt, from your perspective, what were those, early conversations like where you were talking about how this material would be approached newly and how you would revisit your characters and, as Jim says, deepen this material?
There really were no preliminary conversations for me. I was just told where to go and I came. But we were so lucky to have Joe at the helm because he really set everybody up for success. He gave us a week's rehearsal on the set, which you never get on a film, or I've never gotten on a film. And he really, I feel, he encouraged us to keep exploring our characters and to find new aspects to the roles we were playing. And I think we were really lucky to be led by him and Jim, who I think from the very first rehearsal approached this piece and this role with such a sense of courage that it, in my opinion, it lifted up everybody else in the room.
Your characters have a fairly complicated relationship. What was it like falling back into those rhythms between Michael and Donald, and particularly in rehearsal? I imagine having done this over and over on the stage for so long, there was probably a bit of a shorthand there.
Yeah, it was heaven doing it again, but it was heaven doing it from the beginning. And it's something Matt and I have talked about. We talked about in rehearsal, but we've done it and said it in press a couple of times. And I kind of forgot it until we were doing press again. But we both talked very early on, the Michael-Donald relationship was not a mystery to us. It is complicated and it's odd, and will they, won't they, what are they doing, what have they done?
Right.
But I think for a lot of gay men, or maybe just the two of us, it was not a strained relationship at all, kind of friend, romance, something like that. And I loved getting to play it. It's one of the most real relationship, or mimicking real life relationships I've ever played in anything, to be honest with you. Like, I'm so familiar with that.
What about for you, Matt?
Yeah, I would echo everything that Jim is saying. We both had relationships in our life that we could draw from that kind of mirrored what our characters were dealing with, and it was so nice to have the experience of having to hold that ball up together 8 times a week for however many weeks we did this. I can't remember, guys. I'm sorry. And to bring that sense of familiarity and comfort, but to a completely different set, a completely different space, new costumes, new spatial relations, the new kinesthetics. So it was great. I always say this to Jim. I wish I could do a Broadway run before every film that I do. It'll probably never happen again, but I wish I could.
Yeah.
You
guys must have known your lines pretty precisely.
Well, it sounds like the simplest and kind of joking thing to say, but really that was a huge part of what set this experience for a camera apart from any other thing I had done before. I mean, not just the lines, but the time spent with all the other actors, the time spent in this character. That week of rehearsal that we got with Joe on the set was 10 times as effective as it would have been in anybody else's, not just because of us and the lines, but because of Joe, just the whole relationship. I mean, we started at like act 3 on the spectrum of learning what to do. It was just like, keep going. I kind of lost my words there. Sorry.
Joe, I got it. We're good. Joe, this play has I would say a fairly controversial reputation among some. It's a tough play. It was pretty groundbreaking in its time, and I think still has a lot of sort of thorny things to say about gay identity and life. How did you feel coming out of that revival about taking that material on? And I'm curious if there was anything from that experience you wanted to bring to the film that maybe you feel you didn't quite get a chance to.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the reputation of the play is complicated, and it is a lightning rod for a lot of very, very strong feelings. I imagine that the reception to the film will be the same. And it's what I admire most about Mark's writing is that it's absolutely uncompromising. He is not interested in making you feel comfortable. And I think it's actually why the play and the original film have stood the test of time, because you see a man who is going for broke. And I think that that's extraordinary to see that in an artist, someone who says, this is my truth, this is the pure, unvarnished look at one aspect of my experience. And so I think our first job was to honor that, right? And not soften it in any way, but also to come at it from another angle and also examine with the lens of it that historical perspective can give you, and time passing can give you. What else is there? What are the other elements that are built into the script that are part of the fabric of these characters that perhaps couldn't come to the forefront in 1968? So that was sort of, and when you're working on something, or when I'm working on something, I should say, quite often it's instinctual at first. And I don't know why I'm doing it or why I'm going down a particular road, but it becomes clearer as I go on. And I think we emerged from the production on Broadway, and I thought, oh, there's this whole other aspect to these characters that I think we can explore in a very intimate way with the camera that that's tougher to do on stage. Like you were just talking about the relationship between Jim's character and Matt's character. And I think that there was an idea that was interesting to us of like, what is this yearning? What is this longing between the two of them? Why can't they be together? That's a hard thing to pull off on a 2-level set, in a 800, 900 seat theater. But the camera can let you into that experience and so it's some of my favorite, there's some of my favorite moments in this film are between Jim and Matt. And there's the dialogue, which is the melody of the scene. And then there's something else that's going on, which is obviously subtext. And it's just the unspoken yearning and longing that exists that can never be fulfilled. It's a kind of, the sex intimacy disconnect that can sometimes exist.
Matt, for you, how has your relationship to this play evolved over time, particularly with speaking to what Joe was talking about, enhancing this relationship through the camera in that way and finding new layers to the story?
Lord knows I was trying to do it on stage every night as well. But I do think there is something about the medium of film that allows for so much of the subtext to come through. And that was one of my favorite aspects of getting to put it on film. I didn't know anything about the piece when I was first asked to do a reading of it. I really came to it with fresh eyes, and I knew it had a wicked sense of humor. I mean, I was laughing hysterically the first time we read through the piece, and then obviously it does a 180 in some ways. But the more I understood about 1968 and everything that was going on and how this group of men, but the gay community in general, were marginalized and told they were less than and told they were illegal. I think until 1972, 73, it was listed as a mental condition. So the fact that they were dealing with all that and bringing that into the room, and that it changed their relationship to themselves and to each other and to society at large. But I think it's a testament to Mart that he found 9 different ways to do it. You don't see that in 2020. You don't see 8 and possibly 9 gay characters fleshed out so beautifully and individually. So once I understood the time period, and Joe was so helpful in giving us reading materials and laying it out for us, giving us the landscape, the world of the play suddenly completely made sense to me.
Jim, contrast for me your first reaction to reading the play to where you are and how you feel about it now.
The most illuminating thing I've thought about for myself has been this, which was, and Joe's talked about this, when he first read it and Ryan Murphy asked him to read it as if he were reading an Edward Albee play, very specifically, read it as if you're reading Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. And I, like Matt, did not know about Boys in the Band. I knew the title, but had never seen it or read it. So I read it the first time, and I told Joe, I said, I don't know what my exact words were, but the gist was like, I'm not sure I get it. What is happening? And that's when Joe gave me the information. Trying reading it again, Edward Albee, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. And it made it click. And I have, for the whole time we've been working on this, wondered what that click was. Why did it suddenly make sense? And I think, at least in part, it's this. The brutal and theatrical behavior of these characters, when put into a heterosexual story with heterosexual characters, is permissible. And even I, as a 40-something-year-old gay man in the year 2020, am still unlearning the things of what is acceptable and permissible for a gay character and a gay person to do that we'll accept readily for a heterosexual character. And that has been a long but a heavenly process personally to go through. And it's made me reframe so many things of my opinion and view of my entire human experience. Not that I've gotten a therapist or anything, I'm doing okay, but it's just given me, it's very telling. And I think it goes to the answer of why this piece is still relevant. and even goes to the question of why, or it goes to the point of why we keep getting asked why is it still relevant. I think that a lot of pieces, even heterosexual ones, would be asked. I think if we did The King and I, you might ask, why is that good to see today? I understand anybody would ask that, but there's something different with this, and I think in part it goes to that point.
It's so interesting. I think that's so beautifully put, and I've never thought of it that way. I keep asking myself, why was that little bit of advice from Ryan? Why did it allow me to? And I think what it did is it said, remove your reductive assessment of this play. That's you. Now endow it with the same respect that you would pay to an Edward Albee play.
Exactly.
And once I did that, once I removed my own bias against the play, I was able to see what was there. And you've just helped me to articulate what that is, because it's been mysterious to me, like, why was that bit of advice the thing that made it click for me? Thank you.
You're welcome, Joe. Anytime.
Of course, this film also, the play originally was adapted into a film. And Joe, you have had a very decorated career in theater, but you have not made many films. So I'm curious, from that perspective, were you nervous about stepping back into the film director's chair for a story that clearly has resonated for all of you and did a great deal over the course of the run?
I think I'm at that point in my life where I don't get nervous. I know that I'm going to be challenged, but because my career as a director has been, I don't want to short sell myself by saying it, but it's kind of been made up, and I've learned on the job as I've gone on, and I've been fortunate in that I've been given opportunities to do that. And so what I've learned is that all that's important, that there's, I'm not going to walk onto a film set at this point in my life knowing a lot about cameras or lenses or, those are things that I do not know. And I own that. And I also own what it is that I do know. And I bring my full self to it. And, when Bill Pope, our great cinematographer, and I met, I said, if you're looking to have a collaboration with someone who's going to be able to speak to you in purely technical terms, we probably shouldn't do this. I understand something about the emotional landscape of this story. And I think that the two of us together, combining our knowledge, combining our talents, can find our way through that. And it was a thrilling collaboration because of that, because in some ways we were able to complete each other. And it was so great to see him absolutely delight in watching these guys. I think Bill was the biggest fan of this film as we were shooting it. He was just a ball of enthusiasm. And that was so great to see. And he taught me so much.
Did you guys go back to the original film and thinking about how this would look on screen? Particularly for me watching it, it had this claustrophobia that the camera provides and that the story lends itself to that stage doesn't necessarily allow for.
Well, only in the sense that we were working from the same screenplay, essentially. We have a copy of Mark's 1969 screenplay. And so that was our leaping off point. And I think he had made a series of really, really incredibly smart choices about how to open up this play and translate it from the screen without losing or apologizing for the fact that it was a play. But all of those vignettes at the beginning, those all came from Mark. And just the very simple idea of adding a terrace to the apartment and a storm, which then sends them inside. That's all in Mark's original screenplay. And so then starting with that as a template, then we could decide what we were going to subtract, add, modify, change. So, which I think is interesting, just to watch these films back to back, because, essentially you're working from literally the same source material. And how did two different groups approach it? 50-something years apart.
Sure. Matt, what was that, having that added, the terrace element, as Joe says, and those transitions and that feeling of, I think, claustrophobia that comes of bringing everybody inside. What did that do for you in terms of working with the ensemble and finding new layers to the story?
Before I answer that, I just want to give Joe a pat on the back, because I was able to speak to Bill Friedkin, who had seen the film and loved it and thought Joe did a phenomenal job. So I just want to make sure everyone knows that. It is high praise, and it doesn't come easy. So it's greatly appreciated. It was also, I felt, one of the great pleasures for me on this it was watching Joe not grow, because he was in complete command of his craft from the get-go, but really come into his own as a director over the course of filming this. It was amazing to get to see and get to collaborate with. In terms of the physical space, yeah, it changes everything. I thought Judy Becker's set, I got her name right?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Do it every time too. That's so funny.
I don't know why. Maybe it's because I've been up since 3:45 a.m. I thought the set she did was phenomenal. It was so immersive and actor friendly. You could get lost. It's great when you're playing a wallflower or an observer or a witness, because you could get lost anywhere on that set. I mean, I spent hours rifling through playbills from the period in the corner, the great books, everything in it, from even the kitchen. It was so indicative of who Michael was and the home he would keep. Both the high class he wanted and the class that was underneath that. It was all just so informative, and it was great to get to have new rhythms, and also to bring rhythms that we'd found on stage and to change them and change the spatial awareness we'd brought to the performances. So I loved having more to the set. I thought that's one of the things that made the new medium really exciting and visceral in the moment, because it was so new.
I would also imagine that because Donald is, as you say, more of an observer, and there are multiple takes now, and you probably got to see a lot more of your fellow actors perform and see new rhythms, as you said, to the performances.
Yeah, I mean, one of, if not my very favorite things about playing Donald, is that you get to watch these incredible performances every night and then every take. And it was really great to see everybody to a T not just rest on their laurels of what they'd done on stage, but to find new nuance and have the courage in the take to find something new. I mean, one of my favorite moment, I would say, was the last scene we shot, Jim, when Joe gave us this incredible note. I think we'd kind of done like kind of a safer take initially, and Joe gave us this incredible note, and Jim just ran with it in the most beautiful way, in a way you couldn't help but respond to as a fellow actor in the scene. And everything that was happening on the camera in that moment was new. It was happening right there and right then. Even with all the stage time, all the rehearsal, we had never done it that way before. And that's what made this medium really exciting for me.
Jim, did you enjoy that freedom? What was it like to get these additional takes and new, got to maybe experience a scene in a couple different ways?
I went into it trying to prepare myself for what was going to be different about this, in a way of setting myself free. And the things I latched onto, the main thing was, and I brought this up with them, so apologies to say it again, but like, I feel when you're on stage, I feel such a responsibility for the storytelling aspect. I feel just, it is the biggest thing that has to happen. The audience that is there, 800, 900 of them, have to know what's going on, or else why are we up here? And just knowing that I was going to be able to, for the most part, throw that responsibility completely in the laps of Joe in the editing bay, I launched from there into this thing of like, give him options, give him options, give him options. And in this particular situation, it was even easier to do because we had done the play and been with these characters and situations so long that even though you still get scared at times, I knew at a deep level, it's like, you know this. There's nothing you can say that is going to be out of character. It's not going to happen. You've been living with this forever. And so I just kind of tried to mantra that to myself all the time. And like Matt said, there were so many moments that were new and that felt new, and to parlay into what you were talking about with Joan about directing. I mean, I really think that Joe's ease with this has to do with the fact that he is such a pristine storyteller in vision, like pictures and the way things sound. And in that way, it reminds me of the old Katharine Hepburn quote. And she was asked, you know, is it hard to go from stage to screen? She's like, no. In one thing, you're talking to a group that's out there. And in one thing, the audience is right there. Just adjust. And I felt like Joe's direction was kind of like that. I know it's different and with the technical side of it, but it's just storytelling still. And if you have somebody like Bill Pope and good designers around you, just stick to your guns. They'll help you. I don't know. He's a wonderful director is my main point. And he's an actor who knows how to talk to actors, which I've worked with many directors who are wonderful, but still weren't exactly that. I mean, the things that he would come into us and say during scenes were immediately actable. And that's hard, because if you're not an actor, you don't necessarily speak that language or understand what an actionable note is. Well, you kind of have to wend your way around it or whatever, but not with Joe.
One of the touches in this film that I really loved, it's a small one, but it's you get to see these characters in their outside lives a little bit more, glimpses of their day-to-day. Joe, can you walk me through what went into that decision, what you hoped it added to the boys in the band?
Well, again, I go back to that was a choice that Mart made with the original screenplay. And so the idea of the vignettes existed then. And then what Ned Martell, who adapted Mart's screenplay with Mart, what we did was then we went through and evaluated each one as they existed, kept some, modified some, changed some. You know, for instance, like when Andrew Rannell's character is introduced in the Friedkin film, I think they changed his profession to being a photographer. In ours, he's a commercial artist. And so you meet him and you see him on a set and he's photographing a model, and that's what you know about him. And we thought that it would be useful to get that story, that thread of the story in motion right away. So the first thing you see when you see Andrew on screen is he's cruising in the village. And so that was just our way of getting that into motion. And, so there were little choices like that all along the way. What we did add was a sort of a bookend of that, an epilogue or a coda that did not exist in the original film. And, and so we tried to imagine each one of these characters. And that was sort of an offshoot of the Broadway production in which Jim has the last line and he shuts the door, and typically that's where the lights would you go to blackout. But we added a couple of images at the end, and so we just let's see how far we can push that. Let's see these men one more time. After all of that cruelty and brutality, I just thought there's more to the spirit of these men than to just leave the audience just sitting in this muck. And that that we wanted it to be a grace note without it being sentimental. And I'm sure it will be debated or discuss whether that's an effective choice or not, but that was the intention, not to soften it, but something that's additive to what already exists.
Of course, you all got to work with Mart before he passed away on this film. Wondering if you could each share a little bit about having him on set, what that experience was like, particularly after he was able to join you on stage at the Tonys when it won Best Revival. Probably, I would imagine, a nice circle moment, Matt?
I mean, that's probably my favorite experience of all of this, is seeing Mart get his due and to see him up on stage at the Tonys. And he was, I say this ad nauseum with these guys, but he was such in a play that's about a generation of men who don't have role models, he was an incredible role model of what it meant to be a curious, joyful, loving, generous of spirit man and gay man in later life. And I'll always value that. I always tell this story too, but just an example of his generosity. I would always tell him how great he smelled, because he did smell great. And I think shortly after we wrapped the film, maybe a month later, he had sent his aftershave, which was kind of an obscure aftershave, as a gift to my place. But he was just such a great artist to collaborate with, because he wasn't a helicopter playwright, and Joe can speak to this much better than I can. But like Larry Kramer, he trusted the artists who were given to tell his story, and he let them fly with it.
Jim, what about you?
I agree with everything Matt just said. I would only add to it that it took me a long time to figure that out, because I walked into this is just me, scared about running into him, especially after he'd seen a rehearsal or a run through. I was like, oh God, the judgment's gonna fly. I don't really never imagine Mart was asking him and go, what are you doing to my play? But I worried he felt it. And oh, Jesus. So once I got over my own psychosis, I was able to talk more with Mart and see more with Mart. And the irony was how Matt just pointed out, it really was the exact opposite. That man would never have given a note or an idea without being asked first. And when he did, he is the definition of a gentleman and a gentle man in every single way. And to couple that gentleness with the classy fabulousness that he really was. They broke the mold, as they say. He was one of a kind, and he was both of his generation and still a vital part of 2019, 2020. I mean, he was just a great guy.
Joe, you were laughing there. Did you feel, what were the collaborations with Mart like as you got to really adapting his work multiple times?
He was very, very trusting. And, which is not always the case sometimes, that especially when a piece is as iconic as this one. And he really encouraged us to make it our own, and was delighted by the different ideas we had. I mean, particularly on stage, it looked very different than I think any other production of Boys in the Band has looked. And he never sort of stomped his foot and said, that's not what my play looks like. And sometimes you do have those conversations with writers, and that's fine as well. But he was just, he was just a real enthusiast. He would come to the theater multiple times during the week and just really delight in the guys. We used to do this thing where on Thursday nights we would go to the second floor at Sardi's, and he always joined us. And he was the 10th cast member in some way. He really was that much a part of the ensemble. And we knew that he was on the set with us for about a week in LA. And that was great. So, though he never got to see the final product, I think he saw enough of it that week that he got a sense of what it might look and sound and feel like. And so I'm very pleased about that. And then when we came to New York to shoot on location for a few days, we put him in the scene at Julius. And so I just sort of love that, of course, the film is dedicated to him and his spirit. I love that he's there in it also. And if you know, you know. And if you don't, you know. But we know.
Lovely. Well, I won't ask you the "why is it relevant now" question, but I will ask, given that this is on Netflix, which is has a very different, much broader audience than a Broadway play, what you hope this general audience takes away from the film, and particularly what it has to say, what it had to say, and what it still has to say. Who's going first?
I'll just say that I was shocked during the run of the play how many millennials backstage would say how much the piece resonated with them and how they could see aspects of themselves and the characters and the party. Oh, I've been to parties like that where my friends read each other, or I know a Harold, or I know a Michael. So I do think there's something about it that everybody can see an aspect of themselves and in some way. That's just from backstage badinage. That's what I have to go off of. But I do think, in addition to it being, like we said, about oppression and the fact that we can never go back to this, and you don't have to look far these days to see the cost of oppression, it is also a nod to this original cast and Mart for the courage they brought to the table in telling this story in 1968, and the fact that now, today, 50 plus years later, we have an all openly gay cast who all have thriving careers, who can tell this story in no small part because of Mart and that original cast.
Jim, I'll give you the last word.
Well, I'd piggyback on that. But the other thing I would add to it is that, again, the brutal honesty with which Mart told his personal tale and the story he wanted to tell, that is the power which has allowed this, in my opinion, to stick around as long as it has. And that is the same power that allows this, what was such a seminal moment of the first time we saw gay lives depicted as the only characters in something on stage in the 60s, is now still that, but it's so much more. It is so applicable and so easy in our now 50 years later to apply what's going on with these specific guys to so many other people and so many other real situations that go on in the world. But it all goes back to the power of Mart's writing, and only by being willing to be that honest and making something that vital do you get to stand the test of time and have your story resonate in new ways. Who knows how it'll resonate 50 years from now? There's just no telling.
Well, lovely note to end on. Joe Mantello, Jim Parsons, and Matt Bomer, thank you all so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
And we're back. Thanks for joining us again. We're now with Zachary Quinto, another star of Boys in the Band, fittingly joining us midway through, given that Harold's introduction in the film is a sort of midpoint moment. Thanks for being here, Zach.
In my own time, David.
Well, let's start there. Let's start with Harold's big entrance in this film, and particularly going from stage to screen. It's such a moment in the movie, and obviously in the play as well. But I'm curious for you, how you felt about maybe mixing it up a little bit, how you thought it would play on screen versus on stage, stuff like that.
Well, it was, for me, really, that was a kind of integral moment and a hallmark of Joe Mantello's collaborative spirit and openness to ideas and exploration. It was such a significant moment in the play, and it was so theatrical, right? The door opens and it was staged so that Harold's back is to the audience, and he sort of whips around with a coat hanging over his shoulders. And I mean, there was just you really get a sense of who the character is physically in the first, 5 seconds of his arrival. And so the question was looming a little bit, like, how do we achieve that same level of anticipation and flourish when he arrives on film? They had built in this little montage sequence of Harold kind of gliding through the hallway, smoking a cigarette and, stomping it out before he knocks on the door. But there was something that happened in this conversation I was having with Joe when the props department came to me with the cigarette cases that I could choose from for the character. And one of them had a mirror on the inside of the lid. And I sort of went to Joe at some point and I was like, how could we do this thing where, like, we shoot over his shoulder and, you preserve this last moment of mystery with him sort of primping in his mirror. And as the door opens, that then becomes the catalyst for the whip around, and like it maintains the same energy, but obviously it consolidates it for the scale of the film. And he was super, he was like, can we do, and Bill Pope, our DP, who was such an incredible addition to the collaborative team, and such a visionary cinematographer, made it work. And I just felt like it was a real testament to discovering a moment that I think packs a kind of punch in a way, a subtler punch than it did on stage, but a punch nonetheless.
Yeah, no, still absolutely there. More broadly for you, what brought you back into this character? What were some sort of keys to unlock Harold, given that there wasn't much of a gap, but still, he's such a presence throughout the film?
Well, we moved from the stage to the screen in a way that unfolded this whole other world of possibility for us. When you think about a play, when you think about staging something for the theater, your considerations are all based, certainly as an actor, around the notion that, your job is to hit the back row of the theater. The audience is having a much more macro view of the story. They get to look at whatever they want to look at. It's a kind of, dealer's choice in terms of who they're following with their eyes. And then you really condense things in the medium of film. You bring the audience where you want them to go. David Zinn, who designed the amazing set and costumes on Broadway, captured this kind of ambiguous time, right? It was suggestive of 1968, but it wasn't like firmly rooted in a naturalistic representation of the period, whereas of course the film is. So, from the beginning with my first costume fitting, I showed up to meet with Lou Eyrich, who is just an unparalleled talent. She's so incredible, and I've worked with her a number of times before, and she just unfurled these bolts of jewel-toned velvet and was like, which way are we gonna go? And that was the beginning of my reintroduction to the character. So it sort of took all of the elements that we played with on stage and then just, kind of heightened them in their specificity, I guess I would say, right? So we started to build this costume. We obviously went with emerald green, which was about as bold a choice as we could have made. And then, what are the cufflinks? What is the tie bar? What are the rings? What are the glasses? What shade are the lenses? Like all of these things that are more impactful on film because you're seeing them much more closely. And then, we got to the set, and Judy Becker, the production designer, had just, it was this amazing sandbox to play in. Just like every surface was covered with period tchotchkes and playbills from the era, and you'd open any drawer and there was mail from the 1960s. There were magazines and books and glasses and lighters and just all of the things that you could want as an actor. There was just so much more to kind of work with, and I think that was really just sort of grabbed me and pulled me back into the world on a whole other level.
I spoke with Matt and Jim about this just before, but I'm curious for you, did you feel at all nervous about bringing the story back on film, about capturing that same magic again, given how successful the run was?
No, it felt like such an organic progression. I didn't hesitate. The fact that there were sort of conversations while we were doing the run on Broadway of like, at the time, I think I remember people talking about the potential of like a tour of the production, or like doing, kind of smaller runs of the play in places that was kind of like, that's not going to happen probably, just with everybody's availability and schedule. But it wasn't so long after we finished the play that rumblings of the movie started, and it just felt like, what an opportunity, what a gift. And I think for all of us, I don't know what those guys said, I don't want to contradict them or speak for them, but I know for me, it was just, it was such a delightful thing to consider, the opportunity to go back and pick up where we left off and dig even deeper into this world and these characters. And I was pretty gung-ho about it from the beginning.
Yeah. You guys are all aligned there, I think. Walk me through you first reading this play, which has a a certain reputation. It's a pretty divisive work. And what your reaction was to where you are with it now, and how you've grown with it over the past few years.
Well, I wasn't sure I wanted to do it. I read the play ahead of the very first reading that we did of it in New York in February, I think, of 2017. So, quite a while ago. And I was not convinced that it was something I wanted to work on for a number of reasons. First of all, I fell victim to the stigma that's associated itself with this play over the years. And I can honestly say I fell victim to that stigma from a place of complete ignorance, because I had never seen the play, I'd never seen the movie. And this was the first time I was reading it. And I just thought, like, oh, that dusty old thing, as I think I'm not alone in that assessment. But and so we did the reading, and of course it was very fun. But I still was like, why are we telling the story? Like, what is it? Is it still resonant today, 50 years later? And it was shortly thereafter. I think we may have done another reading of it as well. I can't quite remember the chronology of it, but at one point there was like a moment where everybody that did the reading was like, "I'm doing this," and I was like, I was the last. I was like, "Oh wait, everybody's doing this," and. So I had a couple of really open conversations with Joe Mantello, Matt, who I've known for 20 plus years. We went to college together, and Jim Parsons. And, I thought to myself, like, what am I missing? Because all of these people who I love and admire and respect are throwing themselves into this experience kind of unabashedly and without reservation. And so eventually it just became a matter of the fact that, like, obviously they're seeing something that I haven't quite caught up to yet, but I trust them enough to follow them into the experience. And I'm so deeply glad that I did, because I feel, first of all, if I had to sit on the sidelines and watch my dear friends and colleagues have this experience, and not be able to share in it, I think I would be taking a long walk off a short pier about now. But in addition to that, I really came to both appreciate, respect, and understand just what a seminal work this is, and just how important it is that we have a connection to this part of our lineage, and that we see how far we've come in such a relatively short amount of time, and how different it was for not only the characters in this play, but for the actors who played them. None of whom were able to fully integrate themselves and their authentic identities and enjoy the same levels of integration and success that the entire company of this production and this film have been able to. So I feel like we owe them a tremendous debt of gratitude, and there is something very celebratory about telling the story in honor of them. And I come at it now from such a place of reverence and joy also. It's not so serious, but it's also joyful. Today, or I don't know, this week when the movie is released, it's a real culmination of something that I think is an incredible experience, and I'm really grateful for it.
It's funny. It seems like a lot of people, when you first read this play, you kind of don't necessarily know what to make of it. Jim was saying he had a similar experience as you, and he was told to basically treat it like an Albee play, to essentially treat it with that reverence, like you're saying. As you developed that relationship to the material, that respect for it, is there something about it specifically that came alive for you, or revealed itself to you that you maybe missed before?
Oh, it all came alive for me. As I said, my perceptions of it or opinions of it were based in ignorance. So, for me, it was all about the delight of discovery. The whole journey was, Harold is a character who is, he's tricky, but he's also, he's one of the more self-examined characters in the play. And he's one of the characters that really, I think, maybe more than any others, but, again, I don't want to speak for my castmates, but from my perspective, he's very fully realized as a person, and part of that realization has been born out of an acknowledgement and an integration of his own self-loathing, and an ability to transform it into power. And so he operates from this place of, he can be very off-putting, but he's also very impervious to anyone else's opinions or thoughts or feelings about him. And he sort of glides through this world, you know. Joe and I talked a lot about his identity as a figure skater, the coolness, the chilliness of that environment, and then also the kind of the movement of that kind of person, and how that informs his position in the group, right? He never kind of, first of all, he relishes the thought of the world coming to him, and he never extends himself beyond his own sphere of comfort, and I love that about him. So a lot of discoveries in that regard, you know, the complexity of their relationships, and yet their love for one another as well, their absolute devotion to one another as friends.
Going to that, can you talk a little about working with Jim, because the dynamic between Harold and Michael is so it's pretty fraught. I think it's safe to say it's very it's perhaps not what you expect when you hear that this man is throwing him a birthday party.
Fair enough there. Jim is just, you know, I had known Jim socially for years before we got the chance to work together, and I had always heard from people who have worked with him what a delight he is, but he so far exceeded my expectations. I have such profound respect for him as a person, as an actor, endlessly curious and willing to dive deeper and take risks and show up for his castmates. And I just find him so talented and inspiring, and I really have loved the experience, and hope that we get to have it on some other occasion. You know, I think the dynamic between these two characters for me was most fully illuminated by talking to Mart, and that's just one of many reasons that I feel so fortunate to have had Mart's involvement in the play, certainly, and also when we were filming the movie. But, you know, hearing the stories about Howard Jeffrey, who's the real life person on whom Harold is based, and his personal relationship with Mart really allowed me to understand and I think embody more authentically this dynamic of absolute vitriol in one breath, and that devotion that I spoke of a bit ago in another. You know, that these two men, they see each other for who they truly are. And through all the pretense and all of the efforts to escape the truth and, you know, run from reality, these two men are more than anyone else in their world equipped to hold each other's feet to the fire. And that's exactly what they do. You know, I do think in the end, Harold is more formidable than Michael in that regard, but I would think that, wouldn't I? You know, I guess it depends on who you ask.
Perhaps. Well, given that depth and those nuances, and that you had multiple takes to work off, did you find yourself trying different things, exploring different aspects from take to take in these scenes?
I think the thing that I played with the most in the film is how inebriated is Harold throughout the course of the movie. You know, we see him drink an entire bottle of wine, smoke 2 joints, and pound a tumbler of vodka. And then, you know, we know he smoked a joint before he came to the party as well. And the likelihood of pills is almost assured. So, you know, I was really interested in that journey. And so, yeah, you know, the multiple takes, sure, like different, you know, points of view on things, yes. But Harold's a character who holds a lot. He doesn't give a lot. And so that was just one of the, you know, especially as we got to the end of the film with Harold's kind of evisceration of Michael, I really kind of played around with the line of like how far he lets himself go, or, you know, and I like that aspect of the film. experience. I mean, I did that on stage too, but it sort of found itself in rehearsal, and then it stayed there through the run. With the movie, it was like coming up with different levels and letting Joe and the editor, kind of pick what worked. But that was really fun for me, kind of to throw different different levels of drunkenness into it.
Is there a moment or a scene in the film that felt really different to you in the way it came together versus on stage, or maybe revealed itself with a new layer?
Well, in the play, I entered through the door upright. I had a little exchange with Michael, and then I sort of sashayed down left and collapsed onto the divan and literally didn't move until the end of the play. Which was its own kind of delight. I've never been in a play where I barely moved, and there was a kind of power in the character from holding space in that way, right? Like if you imagine an audience watching a stage full of 9 men, bouncing around and kind of running all around, and then there's one who just doesn't move at all. There's a kind of magnetism that comes from the boldness of that blocking. And in the movie, I spent a lot more time kind of moving through the space. And so I think overall, Harold's relationship to Michael's apartment and to the other men in Michael's apartment was a little more varied, and therefore gave a little bit more perspective on things, right? There were times when, he skulked off to the corner because he didn't want to be a part of what was going on. Whereas on stage, he was still in the very middle of the action. He just didn't engage it in any way beyond, beyond his level of comfort. So I like that. I thought it was interesting to kind of see him change his relationship to the space and the people in the space in order to inform his level of disdain for what Michael's doing.
This must have felt like a different kind of performance, given that you walked into the film knowing the character so well.
Yeah, I've never had an experience like that, and I highly recommend it. It was really, I think Bomer put it best when he said he never wants to do a movie that doesn't have a complete Broadway production, the year before. And I concur. I mean, it really was a true delight, and kind of enhances the bittersweet feeling of putting the movie out into the world, because now it really is the end of the road. But it was very special for all of us, and both creatively, but also personally. To see each other grow in these last 2.5 years, and to be a part of each other's lives. I mean, I was a part of many people's lives in this company already, but now it's solidified, and we're certainly a band of brothers, and will remain so even now.
What do you remember about sort of those last days of filming, and really, as you say, closing the chapter on this, which has been a pretty long one?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Most of the company had exterior pickups in New York after we finished the main production in LA. I didn't. All of the stuff that happens with Harold outside of Michael's apartment, we filmed in Los Angeles. So it was a kind of weird disconnect that I was done, but the rest of the company was half done, because they were all going back to New York to film their exteriors. So it had that quality that often significant projects have, which is that you want the end of it to be more delineated than it ends up being able to because of logistics, right? So things sometimes just end up kind of slowly dwindling until they're over, rather than having this definitive, this was amazing, let's all experience what it was like a closing night or something like that. But in film and television, often you don't have that, because the schedules are fragmented and people's availability started to become conflicts, and so it was kind of quiet, and I started another job a week after I finished filming the movie, so I just got myself together and went back east, and kind of had to move right into something else. But it was, the memories that I have of last summer and being in LA and filming are vivid and quite pleasant. Yeah.
I did want to ask you about the expansion of the set as well, because you have these balcony scenes that sort of flow into going inside. What was that transition like? Did you guys film chronologically?
We did chronologically, yeah, which was also another kind of very seldom plan in production. So that was really great. There was definitely a moment after it started raining and everybody comes inside and the doors slam and we're all kind of getting ready to rehearse the next part of the scene that starts the game. And we just sort of all looked at each other and we were like, and we're only halfway done and we have to now the rest of the shoot in this sort of very isolated, claustrophobic apartment set. But it was never unbearable. And again, Judy Becker and her team made such an opulent and playable set for us, and our props department did such an amazing job of populating that set with things that could really distract us between takes. And Michael Benjamin would tickle the ivories, and we'd all sort of look around and pick up things and show them to each other. And I would leaf through books on the shelves. It was okay, but yeah, it was a cool. They did a good job.
Before I let you go, I did want to wrap by asking you about this heading to Netflix. Obviously, you and many others involved in this production turned film, had a little bit of resistance to the material initially, and I'm just curious, coming to a general audience, what do you hope viewers bring to it? What kind of openness to the material?
Well, one of the things that I learned, and one of the deepest ways in which my perspective on this has changed, is I came to see how universal a story this actually is. And my hope is that audiences around the world will be able to identify that as well. There is, of course, the perspective of the gay experience in 1968 that is the filter through which this story is told. But each of these characters is longing for something in themselves, a kind of acceptance, both in themselves and in the world around them. And I think that's a very relatable feeling. And I don't think it's gotten any easier to accept ourselves 52 years later, especially when you factor in technology and social media. And I feel like there's something about the desire to be loved and to love ourselves that this piece really identifies and captures. And it captures it in a snapshot of an incredibly unique time in American history and in the history of the LGBTQ plus community. And so also as it goes out around the world and potentially goes to places where people, and younger people especially, aren't necessarily seeing themselves reflected in their communities or in the world around them, or in the opportunities that they may feel are presented to them. I hope that they can see themselves in not only in these characters, but in us, the actors who are playing them. All 9 of us are out and gay and thriving and successful and integrated in our own ways. And I hope that can be a little bit of a beacon for people in a way, and in the way that we can look back on the generation of actors who created these roles, and many of them tragically died in the AIDS epidemic, or had careers that were negatively impacted by being associated with a work like this. And express a kind of gratitude for their contribution to the continued journey. I hope that we can pay that forward, and that's the experience of audiences, whether they're gay or straight, or no matter how they identify as their gender or race or politics or religion. We're all in this together in a way, and this kind of longing for self-love and acceptance is something that I think everybody is acutely aware of, and in some way in relationship to. So that's what I would say. And it's funny. So I hope people will laugh as well.
I think they will. Thank you so much, Zachary Quinto. And thanks again to Matt Bomer, Jim Parsons, and Joe Mantello. I'm David Canfield with Entertainment Weekly. The Boys in the Band is now streaming on Netflix. Thanks everybody for joining us. Bye-bye.
Good to see you, David. Take care.